The Book of Echoes. Chapter 1. The Last Dance. They danced once and it ruined everything. It was late, and the bar smelled of whiskey and wet coats. The band had stopped an hour ago, but she asked for one more song. He should have said no. Instead, he took her hand. The song played. The world shifted. He remembered the way her eyes looked under the yellow light. Steady, almost defiant. The kind of look that asked a question she already knew the answer to. The bartender watched them without interest, polishing a glass. Outside, rain streaked the window. The street lamps were halos in the wet dark. "Do you always say yes this easily?" she asked. He smiled. "Only when it's trouble." She laughed, low and certain. "Then you'll say yes again." He didn't ask to what. He already knew. They met 3 weeks earlier at a lecture on post-war literature. He was teaching. She was a visiting scholar from Maine. Her name was Claire Madsen. She spoke about silence in Hemingway, how the absence of words could hold more than dialogue ever could. He'd listened from the back row, arms crossed, liking the way she paused before certain phrases, as if measuring their weight. Afterward, she came up to him, notebook in hand. "You didn't agree," she said. "I saw your face." "I didn't disagree either." "That's worse," she said and smiled. "At least disagreement means you felt something." He laughed, then a quiet, reluctant sound. "Coffee?" he asked. "Not yet," she said. "You'll have to earn that." By the second week, they were walking home together after lectures. She had a way of making silence feel companionable, not forced. Sometimes they spoke about writing. Sometimes about the sea. She missed it, she said, the smell of kelp and cold morning air. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked one evening as they crossed the quad. "Leaving the university?" "Leaving all of it. Teaching, conferences, the same dinners with the same people saying the same clever things." "Sometimes." "And I stay." "Why?" He thought for a moment. "Because it's easier than starting over." She nodded. "That's a terrible reason." He knew she was right. That's what made him like her more. The night of the dance, there was a reading at a small cafe near the river. A few poets, 2 of them younger than his students. Claire read last. Her voice was clear without tremor. She read something about distance and desire, the kind of poem that could be about anyone and everyone at once. When she finished, people clapped softly, as if not to break whatever lingered in the air. Afterward, they walked to the old bar by the bridge. The rain had started, soft at first, then harder. Inside it was warm and dim. There was a piano against the wall, a relic from a better decade. The bartender knew him and nodded, as if to say you again. They talked about nothing important, about the reading, the rain, the whiskey. He told her about his first job in Chicago, about how he once spent a year writing a book he never finished. She listened, elbows on the table, chin in her hands. "You still think about it?" she asked. "The book?" "Yes. Sometimes. Mostly when I'm drinking." She smiled. "Then you must think about it often." "More than I should." The clock above the bar said midnight. The band had already packed up, leaving their cigarette smoke and empty glasses behind. Claire stood, her coat draped over her arm. "Dance with me," she said. "There's no music." "There's always music if you want there to be." He hesitated. She raised an eyebrow. So he stood. The bartender put on an old record, slow and crackling. Something from before they were born. She stepped close, one hand on his shoulder, the other resting lightly in his. Her hair brushed against his jaw. He could feel her breathing, steady and sure. Outside, rain hit the glass like applause. "This is dangerous," he said. She smiled without looking up. "Everything worth doing is." After the dance, they didn't say goodbye. They stood by the door, the air between them thick with what neither wanted to name. She reached for her coat, and he caught her hand. "Claire." "Yes. You'll be gone in a week." "I know." He wanted to say something else. Something that would make sense of it, but words felt clumsy, too heavy. So he let go. She opened the door. The rain fell harder now, cold and clean. She stepped into it without an umbrella, her hair darkening in seconds. He watched her go until she turned the corner. Then he went back inside, ordered another drink, and told himself it was nothing. He didn't believe it. The next few days blurred. He taught his classes, graded papers, nodded through faculty meetings. But everything felt slightly off, the wrong tempo, the wrong light. He caught himself glancing at doorways, half expecting her to walk through. She didn't. On Thursday, he found a note in his campus mailbox. Folded once, no envelope. His name on the front in her handwriting. If you say no, I'll understand. If you say yes, come to the lighthouse Saturday at dusk. See. He stared at the paper for a long time. Then he folded it back and slipped it into his pocket. Saturday came gray and cold. The lighthouse was 20 miles down the coast, near a town that still smelled of fish and diesel. He drove without music, the tires hissing on wet pavement. The sky looked bruised. She was there, waiting by the railing, wearing a red scarf that whipped in the wind. The ocean roared below them, dark and endless. You came, she said. I wasn't sure I would. But you did. Yes. That's enough. They stood together, the salt air stinging their faces. A ship's horn sounded somewhere beyond the fog. She turned toward him. You don't have to explain anything. I should. No, she shook her head. We'll ruin it if we do. He wanted to argue, but he saw the look in her eyes, steady, the same look she had that night at the bar. So he said nothing. She stepped closer, and he felt her breath on his neck. Then she kissed him once, gently, as if to seal a secret rather than confess one. For a long time they didn't move. The sea kept its rhythm. The lighthouse beam swept across them, again and again, as if counting heartbeats. Later they sat on the rocks below, watching the tide crawl in. What happens now? He asked. Nothing, she said. That's what makes it beautiful. He turned to her. You really believe that? I do. I don't. She smiled faintly. Then you'll suffer more than I will. He looked out at the horizon. Maybe that's fair. They stayed until the light faded. When he finally stood, she remained sitting, knees pulled to her chest, eyes on the sea. You should go, she said. I don't want to. I know. Go anyway. He reached out, brushed her hair back. Will I see you again? Probably not. That's not an answer. It's the only one that doesn't lie. He nodded, though his chest ached. Then he walked back up the path to the car. Halfway there he turned around. She was still sitting on the rocks, small against the vastness of the water. He wanted to call her name. Instead he memorized the shape of her, the red scarf, the curve of her shoulders, the space she took up in the world, and drove away. That night, he dreamed of the dance again. The same song. The same light. Only this time when the music stopped she didn't let go. He woke before dawn, sweating, the sound of rain against the windows. He sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands, trying to steady himself. The room felt empty in a way that had nothing to do with space. On the nightstand, her note lay unfolded. The ink had blurred slightly, as if it had absorbed the air itself. He traced the lines with his thumb until the letters smudged. Then he put it back, careful, like a fragile relic. He didn't sleep again. Monday morning, the department chair mentioned that Claire had left early. Some family matter, he said. Temporary. Maybe permanent. The words barely registered. He walked to the library, sat in the corner where she used to read. The same desk, the same smell of dust and paper. He opened his notebook, wrote her name once at the top of the page, then closed it. There was nothing else to say. Outside, the first snow began to fall. Slow, uncertain flakes drifting past the tall windows. He thought of the sea, of the red scarf, of the way she said go anyway. He didn't know what he'd do with any of it. But he knew it would stay. That kind of thing always does. Chapter 2: The Letter. Winter left slowly that year, like a guest who didn't know when to go. By March, the snow had turned gray, the kind that clings to curbs and refuses to melt. The air smelled of thawing earth and old smoke. He walked to campus every morning the same way, coffee in hand, collar turned up against the wind. Life had fallen into its quiet shape again. Classes, papers, the echo of chalk on blackboards. The students came and went, young, hurried, loud in the ways the young often are. He envied them sometimes, their certainty that everything ahead would be larger than what they left behind. He didn't speak of Claire. Not to friends, not to colleagues. When her name came up in the department, he managed to keep his face still, his voice even. They said she had gone back to Maine. Some said she was writing a book. Others thought she'd taken a post somewhere in Boston. It didn't matter which was true. All the versions ended the same way, with her gone. He found the letter in early April. It was a Tuesday, gray and unremarkable. His mail sat in a small pile on the kitchen table, bills, circulars, a university notice. And one envelope, cream-colored, with his name written in ink that looked faintly blue. The handwriting stopped him. The lines were firm but not hurried. He knew them at once. He set it aside and made coffee first, though his hands weren't steady. When he finally sat down, he held the letter a long time before opening it. The postmark read Bar Harbor, Maine. He opened it with care, as though it might tear too easily. You once said you stay because it's easier than starting over. I've thought about that. I don't think it's true for you anymore. You just need something to make you leave. I wanted to tell you I finished the book. It isn't good, but it's honest, and that's something. There's a reading here in June, if you find yourself near the coast. I won't ask you to come, but if you do, you'll know where to find me. See. He read it 3 times. Then he folded it neatly and placed it back in the envelope. The apartment felt suddenly smaller. He walked to the window. The street outside glistened with rain that had begun without warning. He pressed a hand to the cold glass. June was 2 months away. He had no plans for June. That night, he dreamed of the lighthouse again. Only this time there was no sea. Only fog and her voice distant calling his name. When he turned, there was no one there. The wind carried the sound away before it reached him. He woke before dawn. The city was still, washed in a faint blue light. He thought about writing her back, but what could he say? Words seemed clumsy again, as they always did when she was near, even in memory. He told himself he wouldn't go. He told himself again a week later. By May, he'd stopped pretending he believed it. He booked the train quietly, without telling anyone. Old habits die like that, quietly without witnesses. The journey north felt longer than he remembered. The fields were wide and wet with new rain, the rivers swollen from meltwater. The towns blurred by, their names half familiar, their stations smelling of coffee and diesel. He read a book halfway through and realized afterward he couldn't recall a single line. By the time he reached Maine, the air had changed. Sharper, cleaner. It smelled of pine and salt. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed that smell until it hit him. A strange kind of ache somewhere below the ribs. He rented a small room above a diner. The window looked toward the sea. The woman at the counter told him the festival reading would be on Saturday evening, in the old church by the harbor. He thanked her and said he was just passing through. That night, he walked along the docks. Boats rocked against their ropes, the water slapping softly against the pylons. Somewhere a bell buoy clanged. The sound was deep, patient, eternal. He thought about turning back. He didn't. Saturday came bright and sharp, the kind of day that looks like forgiveness. The church was small, whitewashed, its steeple leaning slightly as if tired of standing. Inside, the chairs were arranged in a loose half-circle. He took a seat near the back. The air smelled faintly of lilacs and candle wax. People murmured quietly, locals, visitors, a few young writers with notebooks. The kind of crowd that listens too intently, he thought. Then she walked in. It was strange. After all the imagining, the waiting, she looked almost the same. A little older maybe. Her hair shorter. A gray scarf around her neck. But it was her. The same quiet steadiness. The same way she carried stillness like something earned. She saw him almost at once. A flicker of recognition. Not surprise. More like the acknowledgement of something long expected. She didn't smile. Neither did he. The reading began. She was the third to go. Her voice was lower now, less certain but more real. She read from her new book, The Weight of Water. He liked the title. It sounded like something she'd write. The piece was about a harbor town. About a woman who stays behind when everyone else leaves. The words were simple, clean. But there was a line halfway through that caught him. Some silences aren't about absence. They're about what we can't say without breaking what's left. He didn't move for a long time after that. When the reading ended, the crowd clapped softly. People stood, stretched, began to talk. Claire spoke to a few of them, signed a couple of books, nodded politely. Then she turned toward him. For a moment they just stood there, watching each other across the space of the room. Then she walked over. "Hello," she said. "Hello. You came." I did. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either. She smiled faintly. You look the same. So do you. That's kind of sad, isn't it? He laughed quietly. Maybe it is. They walked afterward down the harbor road, past the lobster shacks and shuttered shops. The evening light was gold and clean. The tide was coming in. I didn't expect to write to you, she said. I didn't expect to answer. But you did. I guess I did. Why? He hesitated. Because I couldn't not. They stopped near the railing, the same spot they'd stood a year before. The wind was softer this time. The water below caught the light like glass. I thought about you, she said. When? Too often. He smiled. I was afraid you'd say that. You wanted me to. He didn't answer. The silence between them was easy again, like it had been before everything changed. Later, they sat on the bench overlooking the docks. The lamps came on one by one, their reflections trembling in the water. Did you finish your book? She asked. I didn't start it. Why not? Didn't know what to write. You always did. He looked at her. Not anymore. Then maybe it's time. For what? To start over. He laughed once. You sound like your letter. Do I? Yes. You said I needed something to make me leave. Did it work? He paused. I think so. She nodded slowly. Then maybe that's enough. When it was time to go, she walked him back toward the inn. They stopped at the corner by the old bookstore. The light above the sign flickered. I have to leave early tomorrow, she said. Portland first, then Boston. I figured. She looked up at him. You could come for coffee. Now. She smiled almost shyly. Now. He shook his head though it hurt. No. She waited. Why not? Because I'd stay too long. For a moment he thought she'd argue. But she didn't. She just nodded, eyes shining faintly. I'm glad you came, she said. Me too. Then she leaned in, kissed him once on the cheek and walked away. He watched her until she disappeared into the narrow street, the gray scarf fading into the dusk. He stood there for a long while. The night smelled of lilac and sea salt. A light wind came off the water, carrying the faint sound of laughter from somewhere down the road. He slipped his hands into his coat pockets and started walking toward the harbor. There was a bench near the edge, the same one they'd sat on earlier. He sat down, watching the dark water fold and unfold against the pilings. The tide was rising again. It always did. He thought about her line about silences, about breaking what's left. Maybe some things are meant to be unfinished. Maybe that's the point. He didn't know. He only knew that he would remember her voice, calm, deliberate, a little sad, reading words that felt heavier than they sounded. When he returned to the inn, the room smelled faintly of salt and wood. On the table by the window was something wrapped in paper. The innkeeper had left a note beside it. She asked me to give you this. He sat down, heart thudding once hard. He opened the package. Inside was her book, The Weight of Water. On the title page, in her careful hand, she had written, For M. Who stayed until he didn't. He read the line again and then once more slower. Then he closed the book, set it on the table and stared out the window. The harbor lights flickered in the distance, small but steady. Somewhere out there she was on a train, maybe looking at the same sea. The thought didn't hurt as much as he expected. It just felt real. He left the next morning before dawn. The road was empty, the sky beginning to pale at the edges. The sea stayed beside him for a long while, then fell away behind the hills. He didn't look back. At a rest stop miles later, he pulled over and stood by the guardrail, the air still cold enough to bite. He took her letter from his coat pocket, the first one, the one that started it all, and held it for a moment in both hands. Then he tore it cleanly, the paper soft with age, and let the wind take the pieces. They fluttered, scattered, vanished into the trees. He felt lighter somehow, though he couldn't have said why. Sometimes letting go isn't about forgetting. It's about making room for what comes next. He started the car and drove on, the road unrolling before him like something promised. Chapter 3: The Visit. The first year after Maine passed quietly. He learned again how to live inside silence, how to fill it without forcing it. He taught his classes, mowed the grass, Learned the exact hour the sunlight fell through the kitchen window onto the floorboards. Sometimes he wrote in the evenings small things, a paragraph here, a memory there. Never enough to be a story. Just enough to feel the language move again beneath his hands. There were days he thought less of her. Not because the feeling was gone, but because it had settled like dust on a shelf that nobody wipes clean anymore. He'd see something in passing. A woman at the post office with her hair pinned the same way. A red scarf in a shop window, and feel a brief tug. A reminder that certain ghosts prefer to stay polite but visible. By November, he'd almost finished a new draft of something. Not a novel, not yet. Just scenes stitched together by mood. The university gave him a small office with a window that looked out over the river. He liked the view. It gave the illusion of movement while everything else stayed still. He didn't expect anyone that Saturday morning. The sky was pale, the kind of white that means snow isn't far off. He was brewing coffee when the knock came, firm, deliberate. Not the postman. Not a student. When he opened the door, a woman stood there, her coat flecked with frost. She was younger than Claire by maybe 10 years, but the eyes were unmistakable. "Are you Professor Martin Hale?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "You must be Anna, Claire's sister." The name came out like a breath he'd been holding too long. He stepped back, motioning her in. She unbuttoned her coat slowly. The air between them filled with questions neither was ready to ask. He poured coffee, grateful for the small act of motion. "I didn't know Claire had a sister," he said. "Half-sister," she replied. "Different fathers. Same mother. I don't talk about it much." He nodded. "How is she?" Anna looked at her hands before answering. "She passed away in August." The room tilted slightly, though he stayed perfectly still. The words hung there, heavy but oddly calm. "She was ill for a while," Anna said softly. "Didn't tell many people. Didn't want anyone to fuss. She went quietly. In her sleep." He set his cup down carefully, the porcelain clinking against the table. The sound seemed too loud. "I'm sorry," he said. The words felt small. "I didn't know. She didn't want you to." He looked up then. "She mentioned me?" Anna nodded. "A few times. Near the end mostly. She said you'd understand why she left things the way she did." He leaned back in the chair, staring at the window. The world outside was soft and gray, the kind that erases all edges. "She was right," he said quietly. "I do." Anna reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "She wanted you to have this," she said. "Said you'd know when to open it." He took it carefully. His name was written the same way as before, deliberate, sure, unhurried. He didn't open it. "Not yet. Do you want to sit for a while?" he asked. She nodded, grateful. He poured her another cup of coffee. "She told me you met by the sea," Anna said. "Yes. More than once. She always said the sea was her truest home. Even when she was a child, she'd run there after arguments. Said it listened better than people did." He smiled faintly. "It does." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the radiator. "She had a way with quiet," he said finally. "She could fill it without a single word." Anna looked at him then, studying, measuring. "She loved you, you know." He didn't flinch. "I know. She said she never told you. She didn't have to." Anna smiled a little sadly. "You sound like her." He shook his head. "No. I only learned how to listen." When she left, the letter remained on the table. He didn't touch it for hours. He walked instead through the campus, past the frozen quad, the chapel steps, the library where they'd once sat together in silence. Snow began to fall in small, dry flakes. It was the kind of snow that didn't melt right away, that stayed on the cuffs of his coat and in his hair. He walked until the light began to fade, then turned home. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee gone cold. The letter waited, quiet and patient. He sat down at his desk and opened it. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to see you again, and that's all right. I never wanted to leave you with grand endings, we never needed them. I only wanted you to remember that we existed, and that it was enough. You once said you didn't know how to start over. Maybe you never had to. Maybe you were already doing it when you let me go by the sea. I've left you something. It isn't much. Just the first draft of the book that became The Weight of Water. You'll find it in the blue box in the attic of my mother's house in Camden. Anna knows where. There's a piece in there that never made it to print. I didn't think it fit. Maybe you'll disagree. I like to think that stories when they end don't really die. They just wait for someone to pick them up again. Goodbye, and thank you for the dance. See. He read it twice, then again slower. The words were hers, quiet, deliberate, unadorned. But beneath them was something he hadn't heard before, peace. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then he sat there for a long time, the room dim around him, listening to the faint crackle of the radiator. He went to Camden 2 weeks later. The drive felt longer this time, though the sky was clear and blue. Anna met him at the door of the small white house at the edge of town. I thought you might come, she said. I've been keeping it for you. She led him upstairs to the attic. Dust hung in the air like thin smoke. The box sat under the window, blue and weathered, tied with twine. He knelt beside it, hands steady now. Inside were notebooks, loose pages, a few photographs. A ticket stub from that first poetry reading. A pressed flower, pale and brittle. And at the very bottom, a small leather-bound notebook. He opened it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Some pages were neat, others scrawled mid-thought. The last entry stopped him cold. The dance was not the start. It was the proof. Some lives meet only once and call it enough. Others circle the same moment until they understand what it meant. We never needed forever, only honesty. And maybe that's what love really is. The courage to stop pretending it should last longer than it can. He read it aloud, quietly, as though testing the sound of her words in his mouth. When he finished, he closed the notebook and looked out the small attic window. The sea glimmered in the distance, faint but there. Downstairs, Anna waited with tea. Did you find what she meant for you too? She asked. Yes, he said. I think I did. They sat together for a while, not talking much. At one point, Anna looked up. What will you do now? He thought for a long moment. Maybe finish something I started. She'd like that. He smiled faintly. I think so too. He stayed in Camden 3 days. Walked the coast, ate at a diner that smelled of salt and bread, watched the gulls dive and rise over the harbor. The nights were long but not lonely. On the last morning, he took the blue notebook to the lighthouse. The sea was calm. The rocks were slick with morning dew. He set the notebook down on the railing, opened to the last page and read it again, that line about honesty and love. Then he closed it and let the wind carry through the pages. For the first time in a long while, he felt the quiet fill him, not as weight but as peace. He stayed there until the sun broke through the clouds, then turned back toward the road. On the drive home, he didn't turn on the radio. He didn't need to. The rhythm of the tires on the wet pavement sounded like a slow song, one he already knew by heart. Chapter 4: The Walk Home. The first snow came early that winter. Fine powder, more a suggestion than a storm. The kind that melts when it lands, leaving the world damp and new-looking. Martin watched it fall through the window of his small office, coffee cooling beside a stack of papers he no longer had the will to grade. He'd been home from Maine 3 months. The blue notebook sat on his desk most days, closed, its edges worn soft. He couldn't bring himself to shelve it. It felt wrong to hide something that had become, in its quiet way, a compass. He wasn't sure what it pointed toward, only that it steadied him. The university had offered him sabbatical, a year to write, to think, to rest. He accepted. There was nothing left in the classroom he hadn't already said. He told himself he'd use the time to start his book again. The one he'd abandoned years ago. The one she'd once asked about. So he did. Slowly, awkwardly, the way a man relearns walking after forgetting his balance. He began with mornings, early, before the town stirred. He'd sit by the window and write while the light changed. Not stories, not yet. Observations. A line about the color of frost. The sound of someone's boots on wet pavement. The way silence shifts when snow begins to fall. It wasn't much, but it was enough to begin. By February, he'd fallen into a rhythm. Walks in the afternoon. Writing in the morning. Tea at night. He spoke to no one unless necessary. He didn't need to. One evening he saw a student he used to teach, Laura something, walking her dog near the river. She recognized him and waved. Professor Hale? He smiled. Just Martin now. She laughed. You still live here? For now. I read your essay in the journal, she said. The one about memory and silence. You read that? Everyone did. It felt honest. He thanked her. They spoke for a while about nothing in particular: books, the cold, how the river always seemed to move slower in winter. Before leaving, she said, You should write more. There aren't many who still make things feel real. He watched her go, the small dog bounding through snowdrifts, and thought maybe she was right. That night, he opened the blue notebook again. Claire's words stared back at him, soft and steady. We never needed forever, only honesty. He copied the line onto a clean page in his own notebook. Then another beneath it. The book I never finished isn't about loss. It's about what survives it. He wasn't sure whose thought that was, hers, his, or something between them. But it felt right. March came with wind and thaw. The river broke open, dark water cutting through white. On one of his walks, he found himself near the old bridge, the same bar where they'd once danced. The building was still there, though the sign had faded. Inside, the air smelled of beer and time. He sat at the same table, ordered whiskey, and listened to the low murmur of strangers. The piano in the corner hadn't been tuned in years. Still, someone played a few slow notes, hesitant, searching. He looked at the empty floor where they'd danced. The memory came easily now, without ache. Just light, that soft yellow, the rain outside, the sound of her laughter against his shoulder. He raised his glass slightly, not as a toast but as acknowledgement. Then he drank and left before the song ended. That night he couldn't sleep. The room felt too still, the silence pressing close. He walked outside, coat over his shoulders, and followed the road toward the river. The moon hung low, the snow glowing faintly under it. At the edge of the bridge he stopped. The water below moved slow and black, carrying fragments of ice like broken mirrors. He thought of the letter she'd written, the one that ended with "Thank you for the dance." He whispered it once, quietly, to the dark water. "Thank you." Then he turned and began the long walk home. Halfway there he realized he wasn't cold anymore. The air had changed, softer, almost kind. The wind carried the scent of wood smoke from somewhere up the hill. He listened to the sound of his boots on the road, the slow crunch and slide of snow giving way beneath each step. He thought about all the things that never quite end: grief, love, memory. How they don't fade, just change shape, become something you carry differently. He stopped under a street lamp, the light spilling gold across the snow. For a moment he saw her there, not as she was, but as the quiet presence she'd left behind. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stood, hands in his pockets, letting the silence fill the space between them. When he finally started walking again, the sound of his footsteps seemed to echo less. In April he finished the book. Not the same one as before, something smaller, quieter. It began with a single line. "We danced once and it ruined everything." He wrote until dawn, the words coming clean and spare, the way she'd taught him to write, with honesty, not effort. When he was done he sat back, listening to the early birds outside, and felt something close. Not joy exactly, but its older cousin, peace. He titled it The Walk Home. Weeks later, he mailed the manuscript to a friend in New York, an editor he hadn't spoken to in years. He didn't expect much. The act of sending it was enough. That evening he went for a walk. The air smelled of rain and lilac. Students were graduating. Laughter spilled from the quad, bright and careless. He walked past them, smiling faintly at their joy. The river glowed under the last of the light. He stopped at the railing, hands resting on the cool metal, and watched the current move steady and sure. He thought of her again, not with longing now but gratitude, for the dance, the silence, the letter, the way her absence had given him something to carry forward. He whispered it again, to no one in particular. "Thank you." And then he turned toward home, the street stretching out ahead of him, wet and shining as if just washed clean. He walked slowly, each step light and certain, the night folding gently around him. Final chapter: The Book of Echoes. The first copies arrived in plain brown boxes, stacked by the door like forgotten luggage. Martin stood for a long time before opening them. The label read The Walk Home, his name beneath it in small spare print. He ran his hand over the top box. The cardboard was cool and smooth under his fingers. He didn't rush. There was no one to show it to, no applause waiting. Just the morning light through the kitchen window, quiet and gold, and the kettle beginning to hum on the stove. He made his tea, sat down, and finally opened the box. The book smelled faintly of paper and ink, that dry, clean scent that never lies. The cover was simple, gray-blue, a faint outline of a road fading into mist. He smiled at the title. He hadn't chosen it alone. She had written it once years ago in the margin of a letter. Every ending is a kind of walk home. He turned the pages slowly, listening to the soft crackle of the spine. Each sentence felt both his and not his, as if he'd borrowed the voice of someone he used to be. The dedication read, "For the one who taught me silence is also a form of love." A week later, the first letter arrived. Not from the publisher but from a reader. It was handwritten, folded twice, the ink slightly smudged. A woman from Vermont, retired, who said the book had reminded her of the ache that stays when the music stops. She wrote, "It made me feel less foolish for remembering someone I lost 40 years ago." He read it twice, then placed it gently in the drawer beside Claire's notebook. Letters kept coming, from professors, widows, old lovers, quiet men who never wrote to anyone. The postman started to joke about it. "You've stirred something up, Professor." Martin smiled. "Maybe I just reminded them it was still there." By summer, the book had traveled farther than he'd ever thought it would. He received a note from a university in Chicago inviting him to speak. First he said no. The idea of standing before strangers again, of speaking her name aloud, felt too close to reopening something that had finally settled. But one morning, while watering the small plants by the window, he heard himself say, "Yes." Surprised him, but it also felt right. The hall in Chicago was full, though the world outside was hot and restless. He stood behind the podium, the lights soft on his face. His notes lay untouched. He looked at the crowd, old faces, young faces, eyes waiting not for wisdom but for truth. He began simply, "This book started as a letter I never meant to send. It became something else, a way to understand how love changes form but doesn't vanish. I used to believe silence was the end of things. Now I know it's where the echoes begin." He told them about Maine, about the dance, about the storm and the quiet that followed. Not her name, not the details, only what mattered. That sometimes one brief, unfinished thing can shape a life more than years of certainty. When he finished, no one clapped right away. There was a stillness, not empty but full. Then the applause came, long and low, like the sound of rain starting up again after being gone too long. That night, in the hotel, he sat by the window with the city lights spilling across the glass. He thought of how she might have laughed at all this, at the idea of him, of all people, becoming someone's idea of a writer worth hearing. He imagined her voice, soft, amused. "You finally finished something, didn't you?" He smiled. "We did." Months passed. Autumn returned. The book settled into the world the way old songs do. Not loud, not forgotten, just waiting for someone to find them again. He began walking more, sometimes without purpose. He'd stop at the cafe near the river, the one with the cracked window and the quiet piano. The owner would nod, pour him tea, and leave him alone. On one of those walks he found something unexpected. A letter, unsigned, left in his mailbox, no return address. Inside, a single line. "Every walk ends where someone remembers you." He didn't know who sent it. He didn't need to. Winter came soft this time, with slow snow and little wind. Martin spent his mornings writing small notes in the margins of books he owned. Not for himself, but for whoever might read them someday. In The Old Man and the Sea he wrote, "What matters is not the catching, but the returning." In collected poems of Frost, "Even quiet lives leave footprints." He'd begun to think of these small marks as echoes too, not loud, not final, but continuing. One evening the phone rang. It was Laura, the former student, now teaching literature at a small college in Oregon. "I assigned the walk home this term," she said. "My students talk about it like it's a mirror. They think you're writing about them." Martin laughed softly. "Maybe I was. Maybe we all write about what we wish we'd done differently." "You sound lighter," she said. "I am." After they hung up, he sat for a while in the quiet. The snow outside had stopped. The streetlight caught the flakes still hanging in the air, making them look like dust caught in a beam of memory. He stood, walked to the window, and watched the world hold still for a heartbeat. On his desk lay the old blue notebook. The one that started it all. He opened it for the first time in months. Most of the ink had faded now. The pages smelled faintly of sea salt. At the back there was one line he'd never noticed before, written sideways along the edge. If you hear this someday, let it be enough. He closed the notebook gently. It was enough. That night he dreamed of the harbor. The sea was calm, the air full of quiet light. He saw her standing near the water barefoot, smiling the way she had when she didn't need to say anything. She didn't wave. She never did. But he understood. When he woke, the morning light was spilling across the room, soft and pale. He made coffee, sat by the window, and listened to the faint hum of the world. He reached for a pen and began to write again. Not for her this time. Not even for himself. Just to keep the echoes moving. The words came easily. We never need it forever, only honesty. He paused, then added a line beneath it. And perhaps that is enough. Outside, the snow began to fall again. Slow, silent, endless.